Hello, my name is Ben Davis and welcome to this digital photo Lightroom tutorial. In this video, I'll be showing you how you can use the local adjustment tools in Lightroom to fix any flat RAW file, giving the lighting a much needed boost and injecting extra drama into the scene so your shots always catch the eye. I'm going to be working on this shot here of this castle up in Scotland. It was taken on a very overcast day, not that long before sunset, but the light was rather flat due to the overcast conditions. I didn't have time to wait around and hope that the sun would burst through and illuminate the scene, so this is all I've got. But using the tools in Lightroom, we can transform it into something like this, which I'm sure you'll agree is much more eye-catching than the original shot. So, if you're ready to find out how this is achieved, I'll begin. To start off, you need to import a RAW file into Lightroom. You can either import one of your own, or if you want to work along with the same image as me, you'll find the file castle.dng in the Start Images folder. So let's click Import at the bottom left, then navigate to where my file is located, make sure it's ticked, and then click Import. Once it's in, just select the image and then click on Develop to enter the editing module. The very first thing I want to do, now that it's in, is apply any lens corrections, and that's going to fix any barrel distortion, vignetting, chromatic aberration, things like that. So just open the Lens Corrections tab and just tick Enable Profile Corrections and Remove Chromatic Aberration, and Lightroom will do all of the work for you. The next thing I want to do is give this image a little bit of a crop. So you can select the crop tool here from the toolbar. You can press R on the keyboard for a shortcut. And I want to straighten up the horizon, and I can do this with this angle tool. You can either use the slider here and line up the horizon with these grid lines that come over, or you can click on this angle tool and then you can draw a line along something that you know is straight, such as this horizon of the lake. And then let's let go, and Lightroom has automatically shifted the crop round, and I just click Done to exit the crop tool. To start fixing the contrast and the balance of tones in this image, we need to head up to the Basic tab at the top there, so just pop that one open. The first thing I want to do in the Basic tab is to set the white balance, and I'm going to do that using the White Balance Selector tool by clicking on an area of neutral colour. To find that, I'm going to click on this image to zoom in, and I'm going to select part of this grey rocks as my neutral target. So I'm going to select the White Balance tool there. It's going to come and click somewhere over here in an area of neutral colour. Somewhere greys are usually best. And that's use that sample to set the white balance. If I just click to zoom back out again, it's only a subtle adjustment, but it's got it a little bit closer to where we want it to be. If you want, you can adjust these sliders here to fine tune it. Perhaps the tints perhaps be a bit more magenta, so you could perhaps take it to around about 0 or -1, something like that. Or you can even type in there if you wish. Below here we have the tone sliders, and I'm going to start off with the exposure and reduce the overall exposure by just a little bit, just to reveal a bit of extra detail in the sky and help darken it off to make it a bit more moody. I'm going to leave it set somewhere about -0.3, I think, somewhere like that, so I can just type it in if I want to be precise and hit return. And then I'd like to increase the contrast as well by quite a lot, so I'm going to push this up to around about +40. Below we have the highlight slider, and this is going to reveal even more detail in the brighter parts of the scene if I take it down all the way to -100. You can see the effect that's had on those brighter parts of the sky there. The shadow slider, this reveals detail in the darker parts, so I'm going to push this all the way to +100 because I want to bring out that detail in these dark areas, especially in the foreground and on our castle here. The white slider I'm going to increase as well, quite high. I'm going to push this to +60 to really give the whites a boost in this image, and the blacks as well, I'm going to lift them too. I'm going to put them to +20. You can actually press J on the keyboard if you want to see a clipping mask, and this is showing you on the image where these tones are starting to clip. That means they are losing detail. I don't mind losing a little bit of detail here in these parts of the sky because I'm actually going to be darkening them in another step in a moment, so I don't need to worry too much about that. So I'm not losing big detail anywhere, and I'm not losing detail anywhere here in these shadows. If I took the black slider down a bit into the dark, you can see these blue areas start to appear, and that means we're losing black detail there. But I'm going to take this black slider up to around about +20 and leave it set there. I'm going to press J on the keyboard once again just to turn that clipping mask off. So remaining within the Basic tab, a bit further down we have the Present sliders. I'm going to start off with the Clarity slider. I'm going to increase this to add extra definition to edge detail in the image. I'm going to leave it set somewhere around about there, about +30. The Vibrant slider below, this one controls the more muted colours in the scene, so I'm going to increase this one to about +25 or so, just to give them a bit of of a lift, but I'm going to leave saturation alone where it is. The next thing I want to do is use a graduated filter to help darken the sky, make it more moody and add a bit more drama to the scene. So I'm going to select the graduated filter from the toolbar at the top here by pressing M on the keyboard or just by clicking on it there. Some of these sliders might be left in positions from a previous use of the tool. Just double click Effect to reset them all back to the default 0 position. I'm going to start off by taking the exposure slider down to around about minus 0.5 just to help me darken these parts of the sky where we pull the graduated filter over. I'm also going to increase the contrast. I'm going to set that to around about 20. I'm going to take the highlights down once again to minus 100 to squeeze out as much detail as we can from those areas of the sky. I'm going to push shadows to 100 as well. Just because we're going to be pulling this graduated filter down, we might clip over some of our landscape and our castle here. The exposure settings are going to be making it darker, but I don't want to lose detail in those shadow areas, so that's why I'm setting the shadow slider to 100 to keep detail in those areas that we might clip over. The other thing I want to do is take sharpness down to minus 25, just because I want to take down sharpness in the sky area just to soften off the clouds a little bit. So to do this, all you need to do is click and drag with your mouse and pull this down. These 3 lines indicate the feather area, and the further apart they are, the more of a graduated effect to the filter we have, so it looks more soft and more natural. You can get hold of this pin and pull it down into position, pulling it all over the sky there. And I'm actually going to add a second one just for the top part, so I'm going to click above the frame and just pull down quite wide again, and perhaps just pull it down just to darken off that very top bit of the sky. And just to see what this graduated filter has done, if I scroll to the bottom of these slider controls, I can toggle the effect on and off. So you can see how just by using this simple graduated filter, we can add extra weight and drama to the sky. And now that I'm happy with that, I'm just going to click Done to exit that tool. The other thing with this image I noticed, there's a few little dust spots on the picture. You'll see what I mean if I zoom in here. There's a little sort of splodgy circle there. That is caused by dust on the camera sensor. So I'm going to just zoom out and select the spot removal tool. That's here on the toolbar. You can press Q on the keyboard for a shortcut if you want. I'm going to make sure my brush is set to heal. The size of my brush, I'm going to adjust to suit the size of these spots. So I can do that with my scroll wheel on the mouse. I'm going to set it somewhere around about 50 or so, perhaps 60, just to make sure we cover the whole area. I'm going to set feather to 35, just to have a slightly wider soft area on this. I'm going to leave opacity set to 100. The other thing you can do to help you see where these spots are on the image is to tick at the bottom visualize spots, and you get this sudden change to the image. You've got a slider here where you can control how strong this effect appears. And this, if you can move the slider up and down, you'll see that spots start to reveal themselves at a certain level. So here we are at the top. I can see these spots have suddenly, they look like little donuts across the image, and if they're in the sky you might not notice them there with your naked eye, but when you turn this visualize spots tool on, you can really see where they are. Now then, this isn't a huge problem, but if you were to get the picture printed, something like that, and then you notice these censored dust spots, they'll annoy you, so it's best to get rid of them at this stage. So all you need to do is just click over them, and Lightroom will automatically detect a source area to copy from. So just find a few of them up here in the sky. You can see where they are quite clearly. And I know there's one over here, but if I just reduce this effect slightly, just to take down some of that cloud detail, I'm just making my tool a little bit bigger using the scroll wheel to get over that one, and then I'm just going to untick visualize spots to return us back to our image. And the other thing I'd like to remove is this little bit here in the seaweed, because it's a slight distraction. I don't know if it's a piece of rubbish or just a piece of root or whatever it is, but it's a slightly different colour and tone. So I'm just going to click over that, and Lightroom's just going to choose another bit to copy from. But you can move the area if you want, just by clicking on the pin from the new source area and moving it around, and click Done to exit the spot removal tool. Now, although we've altered the tones and fixed the white balance in this image, I want to add extra warmth to certain areas of it, and I'm going to do that using the adjustment brush. You select the adjustment brush here from the toolbar. You can press K on the keyboard for a shortcut, just opening it up, and you'll get another set of sliders just like we had for the graduated filter. These still have the settings that I used for the graduated filter, so to get rid of these, just double click Effect and they'll all go back to the 0 position. For this adjustment brush, I'm going to paint it over part of the scene just to change the tones and the colours and things like that. The first one I want to do is to paint an area up here to add a bit of extra warmth and contrast and colour to the sky, to make it seem like there's a sun lurking behind those clouds. I'm going to start off with the temperature slider. I'm going to increase that to around about 20. The tint slider below, I'm going to make this a bit more towards the magentas, so I'm going to set that to 10. The exposure, I'm going to increase by 0.5, just to make it a bit brighter as if there was a sun there. The contrast as well, a bit of contrast will help. Set that to 15. And then right at the bottom here, you have colour. You can click here to add a colour effect. Here you have the full spectrum of colour, and you can click anywhere around here to choose one. I want to add quite a warm, sun-like, sunsetty type colour. So I'm going to set it somewhere around about here, somewhere with a hue, perhaps take it down about, it's a bit more orange, somewhere with a hue of 40. You can see at the bottom there. I'm going to take the saturation down a little bit. I don't want it to be too strong, to 40%. And this is going to add a warm wash to my brush when I paint over the image. I'm just going to click the X to close that there. Then below here we have the brush controls themselves. The size of the brush, it's actually easier to adjust the size of it with the scroll wheel on your mouse if it has it. If not, you can use it with the sliders here. Perhaps set it somewhere around about 30 or so. The feather I'm going to set to 100 to have a nice soft edge to the brush, and flow as well to 100, so they'll get the full force of all these settings with one click. With that set up, all I need to do is go and click over this part of the sky, and you can see instantly that we've added that sort of warmer, more sun-like effect there. And you can actually just paint it a little bit bigger if you want to, just make it look like the sun's bursting in, coming over that hillside. Now then, I also want to use the brush to lighten and add a bit of warmth to this area as well. So if we've got the sun pouring over this hillside, it's going to be catching over here on our foreground and our castle. So we need to use a new brush because the settings are going to be slightly different. So I just scroll up to the top of the adjustment brush settings, click new here. Now I've still got all the same settings that I had before, but I'm having a new brush, but I'm actually going to change just the colour this time. Down at the bottom, I'm going to take the saturation down from 40 to 20% because I don't want it to be too rich and intense over these areas. The other thing I'm going to do is increase the sharpness to 20 as well, because I want to add some sharpening to this area to pick out extra definition and detail over the nice textures of the seaweed and the stones of our castle. I didn't want to add the sharpness to this area because there's nothing really to sharpen. This sky detail doesn't need it. So once again, I'm just going to close that with the X, increase the sharpness to about 20, and then with the same brush, just click and paint and drag this over all that area there, somewhere like that. And if you want to see where your brush has been, you can just press O on the keyboard to see an overlay mask, just to make sure you've covered all the areas that you want to cover with the brush. I'm just going to tap O to turn that overlay mask off. And I'm happy with those brush settings, so I'm going to click Done to exit this adjustment brush tool. Now then, there's one other tool up here that we've not used. It's the Radial filter tool that we can add extra effects to this scene. You can either just click on it here or press Shift plus M on the keyboard for a shortcut. And once again, if you open it up, you get the same set of sliders that we had before. I'm going to double click Effect to reset them all back to 0. And this time, instead of painting with a brush or pulling down a graduated filter, this time you can draw a elliptical shape or a circle, and this is going to have effects contained within it or outside of it, depending on if you tick the invert mask or not. So I'm just going to delete that one for a second and start to set up this tool. I want to add a bit more warmth using this, so I'm going to set the temperature slider just a little bit warmer and set it to 10. I also want to make it a little bit brighter because I'm going to use this to create sun effects, as if sun was pouring down across the scene, raking across the lock here. So I'm going to use this to add sun rays and pools of light to add extra depth and texture and give a more sort of 3D and visceral effect to the image. So I've already got the temperature set up. I'm also going to increase the exposure, so I'm going to set that just a little bit, just at 0.2, roughly around there. Also the contrast, just 10. These are just quite subtle effects, and I'm going to show you how I build them up, just so you don't overdo it in one go. So you can use the same slider settings, but just keep adding them up on top of each other until it's as strong as you want it to be. I find it's much quicker and easier this way than going back to adjust sliders between different areas of the image. And that's all I need to do for this. It's just a slight bit of contrast, making it slightly brighter and slightly warmer, just to mimic a sun effect. So if you scroll down to the controls here, I'm going to set the feather to 80 to have quite a soft edge on the radial filter, and tick invert mask so these settings happen inside the shape that we draw. I'm going to start off just by dragging a small sort of circle shape up here in the sky, which is, again, just building up our impression of a sun, one that wasn't there, but we can create the effect as if it was. So I'm going to right click on the center of this pin and click duplicate. That's just added exactly the same on top. I'm going to do it again, add another one, just to build up this effect to get it as strong as I want. And now I'm quite happy with that, but I want to add an extra sort of glow to the sun as you would get. So I'm going to draw a bigger circle this time, so it's going to have a larger feather area. Pull that down into the same position, and we're going to right click and duplicate again, and perhaps once more. Okay, so I'm now happy with that. It looks like we've got a really sort of bright sun in that area that's just on its way to set below the horizon, but it's giving us a nice wash to the sky. We're going to add a few sun rays as well coming over this scene. So you can do this with the same tool, but instead of drawing a circle, you can click and drag a long, thin shape just by doing it like that. You can just adjust the size to get it just sort of sunbeam kind of width, something like that. I'm going to click on the pin and move it into position. I want it to be just touching this castle here. I need to make sure that it's coming from this sun source. So I'm going to just hover my mouse on the outside of the shape near the pin, and I get these rotation arrows, and I can just get it somewhere roughly in place. And to build up this effect, once again, I'm going to right click and duplicate, and again, and I'm going to do it a third time. But that's going to be too much, it's too strong. But this one on top, I'm going to click and drag and pull it down. Those other two still remain there in position, but now I've got a third one. It's exactly the same shape, the same settings, but I can just move it into a different position and just rotate it around. It's got another sunbeam coming down. Right click and duplicate, and once again, just to build it up, and one more, and then again, I think, oh, that's too strong, so let's just move this one down into place, and then once again, just rotate it round, coming from our sun source. And we can right click and duplicate, and once again. And if you want to increase these anymore, you can just revisit that pin there that's sitting on top and add another one, and I think I will, just to boost up that effect to make it a bit stronger, and here as well. And now then, I can also just draw more shapes all around, just to change the lighting in these areas, just perhaps add a bit more onto that bit of the castle, some around the bridge here. I'm going to duplicate that one, and perhaps pull one in this bottom corner. Now this is going to add extra sort of depth to the lighting. It's going to make the image more interesting to the eye. Rather than being so flat as it was, there's going to be pools of light and areas of shadow. So I'll add one more there. Now I think that's overdone it, so I'm going to lift up that one and bring it over here. And let's have another little pool here, just to subtly increase those areas, and perhaps one somewhere in the middle. Let's change the shape this time, make it like that. And again, I'm going to leave that as we are. So just to see the effect that this radial filter has had, you can use this little button here to toggle it on and off, and you can see this is without the radial filter, and then with it on, you can see we've really added this sort of sun effect. This is raking across our scene. With all that finished, just hit done once again to exit that radial filter tool, and then if you scroll down all the way here on the right hand side to the detail tab, we can control the sharpening of the image. First of all, at the top of the sharpening controls, I'm actually going to just minimize this histogram area just to get it all in screen. I'm going to use this target tool to select an area of detail from my scene, perhaps somewhere like these windows in the castle. I'm going to set the sharpening amount slider all the way up to about 100 to really add quite a lot of sharpening to this picture. I'm going to leave radius and detail set where they are, but then the masking slider controls where sharpening happens in the image. We don't want to apply it everywhere, because we only want to apply it where there are edges to sharpen. At the moment it's in the 0 position, so that means sharpening is happening all the way across the picture, and to find out where it's happening you need to hold down the Alt key on the keyboard as you move this masking slider, and that's going to show you a mask. So as I move it to the right, the black areas aren't being sharpened, the white ones are. So I don't want to really sharpen the sky, I only want to sharpen areas where there are strong edges for the detail to stand out. So I'm going to keep pushing this to the right. I'm going to set the masking slider somewhere about 90. You can also see in the detail window above these sliders that just the edges of some of the stonework and the window frames themselves are being sharpened, but the areas inside the window frames aren't. So I'm going to leave it set there. I'm just going to take my finger off the Alt key to return the image to normal. Then below we have the noise reduction sliders. I'm just going to touch the luminance slider, just increase this one a little bit to around about 15, just to soften off any sort of digital grain that might be present in the image, just to smooth some of that out. The final thing I want to do to this picture is to add a vignette, and that's just going to help us darken the edges of the frame, just to help hem it in and increase the sort of moody sense to it. So you need to enter the effects tab. I'm going to start off here with the amount slider under the post-crop vignetting. I'm going to take the amount slider down to -20 just to start darkening the edges of the frame. The midpoint slider, I'm going to take it to 0. So that means we're pulling it in as far as we can. And the roundness slider, I'm going to take it to -60. If you hold down Alt on the keyboard again, you can see a much clearer view of what's happening. And then I want to leave it somewhere set roughly around about -60, just so that it kind of follows the edges of the frame more and is less circular. The feather slider I'm going to set to 100 to soften the effect, and highlights as well I'm going to push to 100, just so if there are any bright areas in the edges, they'll still creep through. And now to see exactly what we've done to this image from where we began from, you can just press the / key on the keyboard to get a view of the before version without any of these settings to the raw file. This is where we are at the very beginning without any adjustments. If I just tap the / key once more, we'll return us to the current state of everything we've done. We've darkened the sky, we've created this fantastic sun effect over on the left hand side that looks like it's just pouring over those hills and down into our scene, really lifted our image and made it much more appealing to the eye. The final thing you need to do in Lightroom is export your file. That means you're going to create another version of it somewhere else on your computer or hard drive. This is because in Lightroom you're editing a raw file. It's non-destructive editing, so you're not actually changing anything on the file itself, which is why you need to create a new one that you can use elsewhere. So to do that, you click File and go to Export. First up, you need to choose a location for where the new file will be created. Currently, this is set to the desktop, and that's where I want it to go. You could choose a different location and navigate through the folders if you wanted to, but I'm happy with it there. I'm going to give it a custom name. I'm going to call this Castle Edit, just so I know exactly what it is when I see it on the desktop. Then below here we have the file settings. I want the image format set to JPEG, as that's the best one to use if I want to put it online, perhaps post on Facebook or to 500px or a website like that. There are other options here if you want a different file format, but JPEG is the one for me. I'm also just going to limit the file size to 4000K, that's 4 megabytes. I don't want it to be too big because otherwise it takes up too much space on my computer, so I'm going to leave it set there. And that's all I need to do. So with that finished, I'm going to hit export and the new file will be created on my desktop in just a few seconds time. Well, I'm afraid that's the end of the tutorial. I hope you found it enjoyable and informative, and please do make sure you give these techniques a go on your own images and see how easy it is to transform flat raw files into ones that are much more eye-catching. So, until next time, take care and bye-bye.